In this tutorial, we're going to be going over how to take an architectural model, so it could be something out of SketchUp, Revit, or maybe Rhino, and we're going to go over how to take those models, import them into Blender, and then use Blender for texturing and rendering. So you're free to follow along with a model you've done yourself, or I've also included a link in the description so you can download the file that I'll be working with and follow along with that as well. Okay, so the first thing to do is to export our 3D model from your chosen architectural software. So if you're following along with the Collada file I've provided, you can skip to the next chapter. But here we're just going to go through it. So I have the SketchUp file. I'm going to open that up. Things will be a little bit different if you're working in Revit or Rhino, but it's the same basic principles. If you are working in Revit and Rhino, I just would recommend exporting as an FBX, as usually that format works a little better. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to box select the model. I'm going to go to File, Export 3D Model. Then I'm going to make sure Collada is selected. I'm going to go to Options. I'm going to leave Triangulate All Faces and Export Only Selection Set selected, as well as Export Texture Maps. And I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to go to my file location, Eames House. I already have one here. I'm just going to replace it. I'm going to hit. Now this is going to take a moment, depending how big the model is. And when it's done, you can close the model. Now, there is a reason why this model is colored like Candyland, and we're going to get to that later. So I'm going to close that. Now I'm going to open up Blender 4.0. I'd recommend using Blender 4.0 if you're following along with this tutorial, or something newer, as there'll be some features in this that may not be in Blender or earlier Blender versions. So first thing, I'm just going to box select, hit delete to get rid of everything that's here. I'm now going to hit File, Import, and then I'm going to look for Collada. There it is up at the top. I'm going to go to place where I saved that file and hit Import Collada. It'll take a moment, again, depending on how large the model is, and then it'll come in. So first thing I like to do is just to clean up a little bit so this looks a bit easier to manage. I'm going to hit the little arrow here next to the overlapping circles, and I'm going to uncheck relationship lines. That'll make that look a little cleaner. And then I'm going to hit the arrow next to these 4 circles, and I'm going to, under color, I'm going to hit random. I just find that makes things, different objects stand out from each other and makes this a little bit easier to work with. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is hit A to select everything in the model. Then I'm going to hit Tab. It'll take a moment to tab in. I'm going to hit A again to select all the geometry of all these components that we've imported. Then I'm going to go up to Mesh, Mesh, Cleanup, and I'm going to Merge by Distance. Now this will take a moment again, but we'll see it's removed a lot of vertices. How many is that? Something like 300,000. So that's going to help speed up our model a bit, because it's going to get rid of any unnecessary geometry that we had, or duplicate geometry that we had in the model. All right, so next thing is just a little bit about moving and navigating around in Blender. So middle mouse button, if I click and hold, that's going to help me orbit. And you'll see I'm screencasting here, so whatever I click will appear in the bottom. If I want to pan, well, first scrolling on the scroll wheel will zoom in and out, and then panning will be holding down the scroll wheel, holding down Shift. Shift first, then the scroll wheel. Then we can move around panning. You'll notice when I'm rotating, there's sort of this unknown center of rotation. If I want to change that, I'll hold Alt, then click on the middle mouse button, and that will change the center of rotation to wherever my cursor is. And here, if I hit Shift A, I can insert primitive, so I'm going to bring in a cube. G will move things within the model, so I'm going to hit G and move this way out here. Now if I ever am modeling and I need to go to something and I can't find it in the model, I can go up to the scene collection, and you'll see here I have cubes, so it's helpful to name these things sometimes to keep track of them. And if I hit period on the number pad, that's going to bring me over to the thing I have selected in my scene collection. So I'm going to delete that because we don't need it for now. I'm going to hit period to go over to one of these instances. Now I did create a little sheet for shortcuts. It should be included in the link I've provided in the description. Just got to double check the name. Okay, it's called Shortcuts PNG, so maybe you can have that docked if you have multiple screens. You can have that up, and that'll be helpful. I've just included the basic commands there, like how to navigate around and basic transformations you can make to objects. So now getting into texturing. The first thing I'd recommend doing for texturing is going and downloading some assets and some textures that you'll want to use for this model. So in this case, I kind of know what the Eames house looks like, so I can think of the textures I might need. So a resource I would recommend is something called Polyhaven, a website. And they have a lot of free, high-quality textures here. There's alternatively, you can also use Polygon. This is more of, I would say, this is more of a professional resource, as a lot of their textures you pay for, but they are really high quality textures, and they have an add-on that will allow you to open the textures right in Blender and download them from there, which is really handy. So in this case, I'm just going to start looking for some of the textures I know I'm going to need in this one. So first off is going to be a concrete for the retaining wall. I think this one looks good. Generally, I'm not going to go higher than 2K unless I know that the camera is going to be really close to this material. 2K or even 1K often does the job. So I'm going to download that. Under my Eames House folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this textures. And that way, as I download things, I'm just going to bring them right into here. So I'm going to open another File Explorer and go to Downloads, open up Textures, and I'm just going to bring these over as I download. And you're going to need to extract them, and you can delete the zip file. So something else we're going to need in the Eames House is going to be we're going to need a metal painted black for a lot of the structural components. So I'm going to search for metal. So here, I'm not seeing something perfect. I will show you how to edit some materials to get them closer to what you want once they're in Blender. So in this case, I know I can change the color of a material pretty easily in Blender, so this green metal should do the trick. So again, 2K, I'm going to download, go to textures, downloads, green metal, I'm going to extract all, I'm going to delete that. Okay. Now you can go through and keep going. I've already downloaded a lot of the textures, so I'm not going to do this for all the materials, but I'm sure this is enough to get the point. So now going back to Blender, if we click this little circle here, this is going to bring us into the material preview. So we're back to Candyland with the colors. Now how we apply those materials, first off, I'm going to recommend you go to Edit, Preferences, and make sure you have an add-on. This one comes in Blender. It's called Node Wrangler. You'll just need to check the box, make sure you have autosave preferences turned on, and then close. Okay, so if we go up to the top of our screen, once you see the little cross icon here, you're going to drag over to create another view, and I'm going to click on this drop-down and go to Shader Editor. So they use nodes in Blender to edit materials. It's a little intimidating at first, but once you get used to it, it's something that's really powerful. So right now I already have my UVs saved from SketchUp, and that's the advantage of sort of texturing something if it's easy in the architectural software you're working in, because we're already going to have sort of coordinates to map our textures to. Now, if you had a model that hadn't been textured beforehand, you might notice when you apply a texture, you get these weird stretching patterns, and it just doesn't look very good. So what you can do if you haven't textured your model before you brought it into Blender, when you do apply the texture, you're just going to want to hit Tab with the object selected, hit A to select all the geometry, and then you're going to hit U. And the one I usually select here is Cube Projection. It works pretty well most of the time, and that's going to give sort of a better projection to your texture on the object. So right now this is metal black beams. I'm going to delete the image texture we have in here, and with the principled BSDF selected, if you again, you'll need Node Wrangler for this to work, but you're going to hit Control-Shift-T, and this is going to open up for a principled texture setup, what we call. So going to Eames House, I'm going to find those textures I just downloaded, green metal rust, open textures, I'm going to select everything here, and then click on Principled Texture Setup. And that's going to set up the whole material for us, already mapped, which is super nice. In this case, I think this is working all right. I am noticing a little bit of tiling here, so I'm going to go over to Scale. If I drag down, that's going to select everything, and I'm just going to bring it up to 0.5, which will make that texture a little bigger. Now, obviously, we don't want all these beams to be, and these posts to be green, so what we're going to do is we'll see where base color connects to the principled BSDF. We're going to hit Shift-A, go to the search, and we're just going to type hue saturation. Now, once we have that, if we drag it into the wire that connects base color to the principled BSDF, it's going to connect in between them automatically. Now, saturation, I'm going to bring down to 0 because I want this to be a black, and this is already looking pretty close to what we want. I would like it, however, to be a little bit darker, so what we could do is we could bring in a brightness contrast node. We could do this with a curves node as well. A lot of these are similar to settings you have in Photoshop, which I find is really helpful if you're familiar with Photoshop. So I'm just going to bring this brightness down a little bit until we have a pretty good looking black. I think it can be even a little lighter than that, actually. I'm holding down Shift, by the way, to make this change a little slower. There we go. That looks pretty good to me. Now, that's applied to those. Now, I'm feeling lazy right now, so I just want to use the exact same texture on these windows. So I'm going to go back into here. I'm going to select all of these nodes, hit Control-C to copy. Then I'm going to go back to here, I'm going to delete that setup, hit Control-V, bring this material output out to here, and connect the BSDF to surface. Oh, we also have a displacement here, which is not connected, so I can connect that up. So there we go, it's looking less like Candyland already. Here, this is still pink, which is weird. Oh, okay, because it's the roof metal. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing with the roof metal. Just delete those, Control-V, plug that in. Okay, so you can continue doing that with the other materials. I just want to show you something quickly for glass that's going to be a big help. So if I go to my asset browser, Shift-A, I'm going to add a cube here, just to show the material that I have. So architectural glass. I'm going to show you a setup for a glass shader. This one doesn't work with image textures. We have to sort of build it with nodes, but it's a pretty simple setup. And this kind of glass will help keep your render times down, as it looks pretty good as long as you aren't super close up to it, and it just takes less time to render than other more detailed glass shaders. So I'm going to go again to the, well, I have the shader editor opened here. So if I hit period on the number pad, remember that's a shortcut to zoom to an object in the viewport. It also works in the shader editor, which is handy. So that'll show the setup we have right now for this translucent glass gray that we got out of SketchUp. And I want to make it work like this one, so it's going to be a few nodes. So I'm going to delete the principled BSDF. I'm going to bring in a glass BSDF, as well as a transparent BSDF. And I'm just searching for all of these. Hit Shift A now and put a mix shader in. You've got to be careful because there's a few different mixes here. It'll be the one that is colored green. I'm going to plug the glass BSDF and the transparent BSDF into the shader inputs. I'm going to plug in shader to surface on the material output, and now this is looking pretty good. There's one more I need to add, which is light path, and then I'll zoom in so we can see this better. I'm going to take the output that is called is shadow ray, light path is shadow ray, and I'm going to plug that into the factor of our mix shader. Now, this will work pretty well, but if you want to take this a little farther, there's a couple things I would recommend. So one of them is that big glass, especially big panes of glass like this, are never perfectly flat. So if we want to show a little bit of distortion, we can hit Shift A, search for Musgrave texture. While you have this selected, hit Control T. Oh, no. And that'll bring up a mapping and texture coordinate node. And now we're going to look for one more node called a bump. We're going to bring the height into the height and the normal into the normal. Now this is looking way too crazy, so we want to bring that strength down, and I'm also going to bring the scale to something bigger, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but we actually have to bring this number down to do that. So I'm going to bring it to 1, and now we can see there's a little bit of distortion. One thing that is unfortunate about this is we didn't actually have a texture mapped to these windows in SketchUp, so if we want our UVs to work on something like this, you'll have to select all of the glass panes, so this is just holding down Shift and clicking on each of them. Okay, these are the only ones I think we're going to see in the render. That's at least what I'm planning. So I'm going to hit Tab, and then U, and then I'm just going to hit Cube Projection. So that'll be using UVs. And now we can see this got a whole lot smaller again. So I'm going to go 0.1. Even that's big, so I'm going to try changing it here until we get something that looks a little more reasonable. Now that's still looking pretty strong. I don't think the glass should be warbling that much, so I'm going to put 0.01 on the strength in bump. And yeah, now this is looking pretty subtle, which is good. You can sort of make it work to your preference, but I think this is working pretty well. Now, one final thing, if you want to get really advanced with this material shader, is we can add some scuff marks to this glass. So for that, we're going to search for an image texture. Again, we're using Shift A to bring up the search. And I am going to just go to do a Google search for a window scuff mask texture. Okay, open up images. This looks pretty good, but it's got a watermark, so we don't want that. This, on the other hand, I think will work well, so I'm going to save this image as. Again, I'm going to go to Eames House, Textures, I'm going to save it here. I'm going to call this Window Grunge. Save. Now in Blender, make sure that window is still selected. I'll hit Open. I'm going to go to... By the way, if there's a folder you're going to repeatedly, to make it a little more accessible, you can open the folder here, so I'm into Eames House, and then I'm just going to hit the plus icon on bookmarks, and that'll make it easier to find in the future because it's going to stay up here. So I'm going to open Textures, select Window Grunge, open Image. Now if I want to see how that's being mapped, I can hit Control T to bring up mapping, and then I'm going to hold Control, and I'm going to, or sorry, it's shit, Control T, I'm trying to remember the shortcut for this now. Okay, so it's Control Shift, and then clicking on the window texture icon will automatically connect it to the output so we can preview what's happening. So we can see right away this texture is coming in way too small. So I'm going to take the scale, go to 0.1, still too small, so I'm going to make it 0.04. Yeah, still too small. Okay, let's try 0.01, and now I'm going to, it's not lining up quite right, so I just want to change the location until it's sort of filling area. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now obviously this doesn't look like glass anymore, so what we want to do is get another mix shader, so I can hit Shift D to duplicate this and plug it in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for a principled BSDF shader. and this will just be a generic white color. It can be soap or minerals that have rubbed off on the window. And I'm going to take this grunge texture now, and I'm going to take the color and plug it into the factor of the last mix shader. So basically what that is doing is saying anywhere there's black, or shades close to black, is going to be our glass shader, and any areas of our grunge map that are close to white are going to be the color of this principled BSDF. So that's sort of what's going on there. If we want to change how much this affects the factor, we can bring in something called a color ramp. And if I want more of the scuffs to show up, I can drag the white in. Now, this is way too much. And if I want the glass to shine through a little more, I can bring the black over. And I can even take this white and just make it a little darker to make those scuffs less prominent if I want. You can sort of play with it until you get something that looks good to you. I think this is probably a lot right now. I'm going to bring it down a bit. I'm going to make this sort of a darker gray just so it's not so prominent. And I think that's working pretty good. Now for the rest, I'm not going to go over texturing everything. Maybe we'll just do one more. We'll do this wall. Again, we're going to go to Object. We're going to have this selected, hit the period to bring up what we have. And I'm going to delete the image texture that we have here. Control-Shift-T to start the principled texture setup. I'm going to go to Eames Textures, Concrete Wall Texture, select all of them, Principled Texture Setup. Again, the scale is a little out of whack here. So I'm going to go over to mapping, go to 0.5, still too much, 0.1, and looking pretty good. I'm going to go to 0.07, though, I think will be about right. Yeah, that looks about the right height for a lift in a pour of concrete, so I think that's looking pretty good. And again, you can apply the same principle that we did with the window. If we want to add a little more visual interest to this, I can add an image texture, Control-T, I'm going to open. This is something I downloaded separately earlier. I have a grunge mask here. I'm going to open it, Control-Shift-Click to preview it. It's way too small. We're going to go to 0.1. That's pretty good, but 0.05 would probably be better. So I just want it to look kind of wet and grungier, closer to the ground. So again, I'm going to use a mix shader here. Or in this case, I don't even have to use a mix shader. What I can do is I can... Yes, what I can do is I can go mix color and plug that into the principled BSDF here, and I'm going to use this as the factor just in mixing the color, and I don't have to create a totally different texture setup. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in a curves node. Ooh. Plug that into there. So now, right now these are the exact same color, but I want the one closer to the ground to be darker. Also, this is the opposite, so I'm just going to have to switch the inputs here. And that looks pretty good to me. So there you have a concrete setup that's a little more wet and weathered towards the bottom. Now, as you're texturing, you may be wondering, what if I have an object that I want more than one material on? For example, this slab here. I'll click, with the slab selected, I'll hit Shift-H to hide and isolate it, so we can work just with this slab. If we want to bring everything back, that's Alt-H. But for now, we just want to see the slab. So Shift-H will hide everything else. So in this case, I want a different topping on this slab, but I want the sides to show as concrete. So the way we do that is we go to the side here, and we go to the Material Properties tab. And over here, where we have our slab material, we go to the right and we click that plus icon. So that'll add a slot for another material. And then what you can do with that selected is you can add a new material here the same way we've done it previously. I have the polygon add-on here, so I'm just going to go this route, and it's going to be a little faster for tiles. Okay. So I'm going to hit apply. And you'll notice now that I've added that material, nothing's actually happened yet. And the reason for that is we need to assign faces for this material to be applied to. So I'm going to hit N to close that up. So if I have an object selected and I hit tab, this brings us into what we call edit mode. And when we're in edit mode, there's 3 different ways of selecting things. So if we hit 1, this is not on the number pad. It'll bring us to vertex mode, so we can select vertices of an object. If we hit 2, it'll bring us into edge select mode, so we can then select the edges of an object. And 3 will allow us to select the faces. So that's what we want. I'm going to select this top face. I'm going to go back over to the materials tab here, and I'm with the tiles terrazzo Venetian, the second material selected, and with that face selected, I'm going to hit assign. So that'll bring in other material. So I'll hit tab to get out of edit mode, and now we can see the materials brought in, but it's too big. So I'm just going to go into the materials tab and edit the scale until it looks more or less accurate. That looks pretty good to me there. I'll hit Alt-H to bring everything back. So this is getting pretty close to being ready to render. The last thing we're going to do is just, if you have the shading window open here, we're going to go and click this drop down from object to world, because right now we don't have anything lighting the scene. So if you go back to that website Polyhaven that I recommended, and you sort assets by HDRIs, you're going to see a lot of these kind of files which provide environment lighting for a scene. So if you download one of those, it'll give you something called an EXR file, and then in our world settings we'll hit new. I'm just going to call this HDRI. So I'm going to hit Shift A to search, and I'm going to insert an environment texture. Also going to need a world output. Plug the color into the surface, and then we're just going to open the HDRI that we just downloaded. So I have a folder here for HDRIs. I think that one was called Meadow 2. And now, we don't see anything right away, but if we switch my render engine to cycles and make sure I'm using GPU for rendering, if I hit this final circle up at the top, this will bring us into what's called render view. And now we'll see our model lit up. So this is sort of the gratifying stage where we get to see how everything worked. Now, I want to make sure I get a dramatic angle on the lighting and something that works with our render. But before we really try to do that, I think it's important at this stage to set up a camera, and that's something we will need for renders as well. So to set up a camera in your scene, you're going to hit Shift A, then you're going to go down to Camera, and that'll add a camera to your scene. So it's inserted at the origin right here. So I'll hit G to drag this out. And I find the easiest way to move a camera is if you hit 0 on the number pad. This brings you into the camera view. Now if you hit N and go to View on the sidebar, you can check a box called Camera to View. And what this is going to do, if I hit N, that'll hide that again, is as we do our normal orbiting, it's just going to bring the camera along with our view, which is super helpful. So we can edit the camera settings a little bit here. Right now it's a 50mm focal length. For something like this, I might do 35. I'm going to turn up the passepartout so we can see more clearly what's in the frame of our camera. Something I find helpful as well is to use composition guides. So if you hit the drop down, not that one, here it is. So you can use something like thirds, golden ratio, and use thirds. I want to line up the corner of the house, the thirds for this render. Okay, now I hit render to see how that looks. Yeah, this is kind of the angle I think I'm going to go for this render. But I like the shape of the house on this side. It's got this overhang that I think will create some really interesting shadows if we move our HDR lighting around a little bit. So to do that, I'm going to open the shading tab for the HDRI, and I'm going to, with the texture selected, I'm going to hit Control T, or yeah, there we go. That'll bring our mapping node in. And then with rotation, I'm just going to move the Z until we get something that's a little more interesting. So I really like that there. Here now I think we're creating really interesting shadows with the front part of the house here. So now at this point you're ready to render, and something you can do if you want to use Photoshop to create the sort of the environment is you can go over to your render settings here. You're going to scroll down to the film tab. So if you hit the drop down, there'll be an option for transparent. If you check that, it's going to render this as a transparent PNG. You'll still get the lighting from the HDRI, but everything else will be in the background. So now I'll just do a quick render to show how this works. So I'm going to put the time limit just to 1 minute because I want to do this quickly. This isn't going to be a final product for me, but if this is what you want for a final product, you can crank that up to get something with maybe a few more samples. I'll leave denoise checked, and then all you have to do is hit render up at the top here. So render image. Okay, not bad. So here in a minute we got to 99 samples, and here's our final result. One thing I'm noticing is my window grunge seems a little bit strong here, so that's something I might go back and change, and that's also an advantage of doing just one of these fast renders to see how it turns out. Other than that, I think it's looking pretty good. It obviously needs some work before this is something that's going to be presentation ready, but that's how rendering works in Blender. Now, if you want to save this image, you're just going to go up to Image, and then Save As, and save it to your preferred location. One more tip about cameras is if you are trying to do some kind of architectural graphic, you can also change these cameras to orthographic. So that is a setting. Where's our focal? Okay, yeah, I need to have camera selected. Yeah, up here where it says type, you can switch from perspective to orthographic. And now I'll probably need to increase the size of the camera to really capture this. So yeah, there it is. Okay, that'll be this slider here. So how's that looking? Yeah, maybe I want. Then camera to view again. Okay. Size up a little bit. Yeah, maybe I want something like this. So I'm going to render image, and there we go. So that's it for texturing and rendering. If you want to see more details about how to create an environment for your renders in 3D, and you want to create something like what we see now, you can click on the next video in this series. It's a 2-part series, and we're going to go over how to import assets such as trees and rocks, how to scatter those assets using geometry nodes, and how to tell a story with your render. So hope to see you there, and have a good one.